Welcome to the January 2025 Legislative Matters meeting. We don't have a long agenda tonight, but I'm hoping we'll have a nice discussion about the fossil-free construction ordinance. That is what we have to pass as City Council in order for the city to join in with the fossil fuel free demonstration program that's being held statewide. It's very exciting. It's very exciting to be to have this in front of us to join the other cities. We're the only Western Mass city that's been able to that has been brought into this pilot program, and so now we're here to discuss that. So I will ask to call roll again, just by virtue of the fact that we're all here.
Sure. Councillor Elkins.
He's still here.
Councillor Perry.
Here.
Councillor Jarrett.
Here.
Here.
All right. And we still have a quorum. We have a even bigger quorum. Yeah, so I would announce that the meeting is being audio and video recorded. So just to let folks know, the next on the agenda is public comment. But we also have, we build the discussion of the legislation as a sort of a forum. And we have some people here to speak to it. I guess I would ask, since we both have both of our sponsors here, my inclination would be to have folks who are speaking to the legislation just speak during the forum part of it, but I would also defer if you guys have thoughts about it. Does that sound okay to you guys?
Yeah, we usually, public comments on the agenda for items not on the agenda. If someone wants to speak to us generally about legislative matters, they could do that during this time. But then if you're here to talk to the item before us, then you would speak during the public forum.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. But anybody can say whatever they want during public comment, but I would let folks know that we'll open the floor to more discussion on the legislation when we get to that agenda item. So is there anybody here who wants to speak in public comment to anything not on the agenda? Anybody online? I don't see anybody. Okay. So moving on. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from September 30th, 2024 and December 9th, 2024.
Sorry, I didn't circulate the September 30th. They are finished, but they weren't part on.
Okay. All right. So just the December 9th meeting minutes. Okay. All right. Have folks.
Yeah.
Second.
That was fast. Oh, okay.
Sorry. Move to approve.
Thanks. All right. So we have a motion to approve and a second, the December 9th, 2024 minutes. And that is just for the record, the joint planning board and legislative matter minutes from that meeting was a joint meeting. So we need to call the roll because we're not all here.
Councillor Elkins.
Yes.
Councillor Perry.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Very good. All right. Having dispensed with that little bit of business, the next thing on the agenda, and that's the big item, is the discussion of 24.170 fossil fuel free construction ordinance per Massachusetts fossil fuel free demonstration program. We have a few people here to speak to that, and I get a sense that folks in the audience are here to talk about that as well. And so we'll start with the sponsors and we'll just open it up for a discussion.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Elkins. So I believe we have Climate Action and Project Administration Director Benjamin Weil here with us. And welcome, Ben. And Ben, and we have prepared a very short presentation. It's only 4 slides, so we'll get through that quite quickly. Did you want to start that off, Ben?
I can, if that works for you. It's really just setting the table. So yeah, I'll share my computer and So yes, big title slide for a few slides. So basically we were invited by the Department of Energy and Resources to participate as the only Western Mass municipality in their pilot fossil fuel free essentially addendum to the specialized stretch code. And it was something that we had kind of demonstrated the capacity to do in the past, and so and it was something that a lot of people in the community wanted. And I would say one of the things that was a concern for DOER was that they weren't getting very much for it. And that's because we were already very, very close to that just by default. And I'll get into that in a minute. But so the basic difference is we have our current specialized stretch code. And for all electric houses, and I only did the low-rise residential, but the basic concept for commercial and multifamily is similar, but with exemptions, is a HERS 45 or passive house, and that continues. In other words, there's no change. Really, the only change is this removes the mixed fuel option, which you'll note required both for smaller houses and larger houses, a lower HERS rating, so harder to achieve, and significant investment in wiring to allow for electrification. Under fossil fuel free, that pathway is not one that is available, but there are some exemptions, especially as you get to some larger buildings and more complex kinds of buildings. So really, it's taking this one mixed fuel pathway and removing it, again, with some exemptions. And then for alterations and additions, it matches the stretch code currently. And the only difference really here is that since this is specifically about the energy source for heating, whether heating hot water or heating or space heating, that this only comes in as a difference if that is part of the project. In other words, if you are replacing or adding new heating equipment in a new addition, then it would have to comply with the fossil fuel free component. But if new equipment is not being added, then it's not being added. So it's not part of the discussion. The same exemptions that have existed for historic buildings continue because that's part of specialized stretch code. I think it's really important to emphasize that, again, what does not change is that like for like replacements are not considered a major renovation. They're not incurring this thing. So it's not like all of a sudden you can't replace your boiler with anything other than an air to water heat pump. That wouldn't be reasonable. But if it's a major renovation and you're changing the envelope or changing the thermal boundary, then it comes into play. And of course, the other thing, and this is what DOER was most concerned about, as in we're already there, is there's a fossil gas moratorium on new accounts that's due to Eversource having no additional capacity. So in a certain way, you could say that we are functionally a fossil fuel free community already for new construction. Just because there's no gas available and other choices tend not to be cost effective. The most work, so I did have the chance to work with councilors Jarrett and Maori a bit on this, and most of the work was in thinking carefully about exemptions and waivers. So research laboratories, scientific medical research, hospitals, medical offices, those things are exempted. Cooking and wood burning appliances, we didn't want it to make it illegal to have a wood-fired pizza place in the middle of town, because that's a nice thing. And similarly, people want to have those sorts of appliances for kind of quality of life, and so that's an exemption. Again, outdoor cooking appliances, emergency generators, for obvious reasons, need to be exempted, and domestic hot water in large buildings. is exempted. And I think we have, someone who's looking at the document can say, I think it's over 12,000 square feet. But don't hold me to that because I'm not looking at the number right now. Process loads for manufacturing, industrial, and commercial purposes are also exempted if a fossil fuel-free option is not viable. And the general approach is to get affidavits from engineers to attest that, this isn't going to work. So it's, as we saw it, or certainly as I saw it, the effort to get an engineer to at least check, is it possible to do this fossil fuel-free, may open some opportunities that might not have been considered had no one actually just asked an engineer to check. So by asking them to check, I think it makes sure that we're not missing opportunities to avoid fossil fuel commitment. Because once you commit to fossil fuel, it's locked in for 20, 30 years. And then if there are extraordinary costs, in other words, if it's the difference is going to cause the project to cost, I think it was 150% of the original cost, that would be a waiver. And finally, that there are locations on the electric grid that simply don't have capacity for whatever electrical use is being proposed for a location. So those are the components we were talking about, and really that's all we had. And this is, I think, mainly to do some listening and discussing. Thanks for letting me address it.
Yeah, thank you, Director Weil. Rachel, did you want to go next or should I?
You can go.
Okay. I just wanted to, I'm looking at our current, so there's two iterations of the ordinance. One, and both are on the agenda. One is the one we originally introduced, and then another we've been continuing to refine, to work on the exemptions and waivers. So that's the second one that you see, and that's the one I'm planning on asking to move forward with, for a recommendation tonight. So a couple of the things that Ben mentioned, just if the project costs increase by 50% or more, that's considered a extraordinary cost. And then, yeah, it's multifamily buildings over 12,000 square feet. And then there's another one for over 10,000 square feet that also looks at installation costs, in terms of domestic hot water. So I'm, want to thank my co-sponsors and Direct Ben Weil of the the Climate Action and Project Administration Department, and also want to thank Mayor Shara, who's co-sponsoring this with us, and Councillor Elkins, who worked there on the original ask for the special legislation, and my thoughts briefly are that state and local action is critical on climate at this point, especially with the upcoming federal administration, and that we need to phase out our existing fossil fuel infrastructure over time. So it doesn't make sense to build new infrastructure that we then have to phase out if that's feasible presently. And with the gas moratorium, as Ben mentioned, the fossil fuel free is generally more cost effective in new construction. But we don't want to unduly burden anyone, and we've added many exemptions and waivers to support that. We look forward to hearing from you, so that we can refine those between either tonight or between now and when we vote, which will be a week from Thursday. And I'll turn it over to Councillor Maori.
Right. Well, thank you. You've covered so much. I just wanted, the background is, this is a completely community-driven project, which was then presented to a very responsive mayor. But this was really about six community groups in the beginning who are really dedicated to making this happen. I want to shout out to Adele Franks, whose dedication, this has taken a couple of years. So thank you, Adele. And thank you to Rep. Sabadosa and Senator Comerford, and as well as all the other folks we already thanked. But I just want to give that perspective that that this is something, you know, that we were responding from the community. And I really think it's actually very important that we don't have the same demographic as the others in the program. I think I would argue we are more critical that way. They need to really see if this is doable in communities that aren't in Eastern Mass, that aren't as wealthy. And so I think that we really bring a lot to this, to the program. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And also, yeah, but we really are looking for feedback. Our one point of, you know, locus of control is over the exemptions. So we are particularly looking for feedback to make sure they are kind of practical and useful to folks in our community. Thanks.
Hey, thanks. I'll turn it back over to you to run the forum.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I can see a number of people whose I think insight will be in the audience, whose insight will be valuable as well as online. I think so. I'm going to make a bold prediction here, which is that I think a lot of folks are. I think the community is generally supportive of these measures, and I think that and I see a little bit of scowly faces in front of me, that the folks who are designing and building and doing what they can to do what we've, you know, Councilor Jarrett and I have certainly done a lot of it, Councilor Mayor, all of us. I mean, we say we want housing. We say we want more building, we want more development. And I also know that builders are sitting here going, well, come on now. This makes things harder, and potentially more expensive. And, I'm really glad that folks are out here tonight to talk about this. Certainly the political support is there. And, you know, it's been through a few rounds, iterations in terms of resolutions and advocacy in the state house, by our representatives, the senator and by counselors, and on NESC and things like that. And we also know implementing it is that we're not the ones doing the work to build the houses, build the developments and those kinds of things. So it really is the case that I'm glad those of you who do that work, and who've pitched in with the city to do that work are here to talk with us. So I said to wait for comments. So why don't we do this? If you're here, and there's at least Bob Sproul is on the list, but I'll let folks come up and speak to us first, and then we'll come back around and there are folks from the city, the sponsors, there are folks here that we can just have a discussion is what I'm hoping to have. So, Bob, do you want to go first?
So thank you. I fear my comments may have been mooted. You've been making changes pretty fast, not just to your piece, but you know, the underlying stretch codes and their overlays have been changing too. So, excuse me.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but if you could say your name and
I'm
where you live for the record, and also, and I wouldn't normally ask this, but if it's helpful for us to understand sort of how you come at your interest in this particular topic.
Well, okay, sure. So my name's Bob Sproul. I live nearly next to Rachel on Chesterfield Road. And I built a house 15 years ago here that it's heated with ground source heat pumps. It has the maximum amount of solar that the state allows, and it's worked very well. But it depends on having propane standby, because the electric in this area is not dependable. There have been 2- and 3-day outages in the winter in the last 10 years. And my house all the water pipes would have frozen. So when I looked at this, I did not find that when I looked, and I'm willing to admit I may not have looked in all the right places, I did not find any exceptions for standby generation. And you look at the way the title, the way fossil free is defined, it leaves no room for exceptions. And I think that's dangerous. I think if you're going to start restricting how people build things, and especially if you're concerned about affordable housing, I think you need to help people solve the problem in the presence of your restrictions. And certainly standby power is one of them. Now, surely 30 years from now, the energy landscape may look quite different. That's certainly possible. Whether it looks remarkably different, I don't know. I don't think you're going to find other sources of energy substantially cheaper than those that we have now. So, at any rate, so my challenge to you there is really a communication problem with our community. I think you've got to make it clear how these restrictions are going to make building better, not harder, and preferably not more costly. So I'll just finish with one last complaint. I really object to the term fossil fuel free. I know the state uses that term. I don't think Northampton has to echo it, because houses that meet your restrictions will not be fossil free. They will merely export via the electrical grid their fossil fuel dependency to other sites and jurisdictions. But the grid may someday be fossil free, but I don't think it's in my lifetime, and I don't think in yours either. And so I think this is I get the marketing pull of wanting to pile on this money. That's fine, but I don't think you have to portray it to our local citizens as what I conceive of essentially a deception. So, thank you.
Thank you. Bob is the only person on the list, so I just open it up to folks who want to come forward and speak. Come on up.
There, sorry I'm late. I flew to get here. Just a couple quick notes. My name is Sue Timberlake. I live in Florence, and I work for a hardware store, a plumber. I own my own house, which has a standby generator, and I work for a housing place down in Holyoke that helps to house people that don't have any housing. I'm not speaking for any of them. I'm just speaking for myself. I used to be a wind turbine company owner. We did a lot of development, and I ran out of money. But I'd like you to think further than you're thinking tonight. The grid can't sustain it. In California, they tell you not to charge your car when they have a brownout. You know, we're really not there yet, but I'm going to ask you to go even further than you did. Take the word carbon out of fossil fuel. I mean, add the word carbon to fossil fuel so that you're only talking about carbon that is fossil fuel, because hydrogen is green and sometimes it occurs with fossil fuel and it's H2. It's not connected to any carbon. They're working on it all over the rest of the world. They're trying to create a hydrogen economy, and your legislation or statute, from what I can see, does not allow for that. And I think within 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a way to process hydrogen that you don't actually need the electric grid anymore. And so if you say you can't have fossil fuels and the way we're getting hydrogen is because it's commingled with fossil fuels, then you won't permit people to use hydrogen for their house heating. And I heard the comments earlier, and I totally agree that you need to be really careful, but please think further. Please add hydrogen as an allowable fuel source because it doesn't contribute to CO2. And just think about that as you look at the legislation. The state of Massachusetts doesn't define it very well, and I think that really needs to be explicit because even Germany's on the verge of making this happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Online we have Tom Bassett.
Thank you. I live in Florence. I'd like to express my thanks for all those that worked on this resolution. I think it's really important to communicate to the community what it means in real terms. So I think it's a good step toward letting us be one of the Western Mass, the only Western Mass communities that is part of this program. But I think it's really important to communicate to people that don't know anything about this. And there's quite a large percentage of the population that doesn't know much about this kind of initiative and may think it is, you know, dictating that they not use any fossil fuels and dictating what they buy for appliances, and just it's an opportunity to really turn around people's view on what it means to be making changes to help mitigate climate change. So my big message is thank you, and please communicate and do lots of outreach to the community so they understand and can ask questions to reach a better understanding and support of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Come on forward.
Hi, my name is Elan Tierney. I'm president of Kuhn Riddle Architects and Designers in Amherst, and I'm a Northampton resident. I appreciate so much what Northampton does to be a green community, a sustainable community. But as a practicing architect and someone who's working with clients who sometimes are challenged to build just the basics, childcare, affordable housing. We have found that even just the stretch code in some communities have caused projects to have stopped, like a change of use from a dormitory to a child care center couldn't move forward because the costs of bringing that building up to meet just the stretch code, not even the fossil fuel, and it didn't apply to the opt-in code, meant that that project couldn't move forward. I want to echo what Bob Sproul said about where is the energy coming from? Is it really clean power that we're getting now that we're increasing all of our buildings to be 100% electric? I think I came in a little bit late, but I think there was some comments about the cost of electricity in Massachusetts being one of the highest in the country. And so if we are now creating much more demand on the grid, what does that mean for the costs? And the last thing I just want to talk about is renovating buildings. I love historic buildings. I love renovating them. I know that there are some exceptions, but sometimes buildings aren't deemed historical. And so if you went to renovate 50% of it, or is a change of use, and you have to meet this requirement, are you suddenly not able to do it because of the cost of construction that's added? And so then you rip that building down, and what's the carbon cost of that, taking that building down and then building new? So I'm curious how much thought has been put into the true cost to Northampton, and whether it will turn people away from development in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Bumping back online, Mark Moggio.
Hi there. I just wanted to, I can understand trying to go fossil fuel free, but I don't know if it is a reality, unfortunately. I have a project that I started over the summer at a 3-family house on Dewey Court in Northampton. And my electrician went over there. We got the meter socket on the side of the building. We ran all the wires. We have the circuit breaker panels in the basement. We were all ready to go. And then when we called the electric company to come have them install it, they shut the project down and said, you aren't going to see power there for a while, because they were concerned with the amount of power on the grid, that we're running out of power on the grid. This was an engineer that told me this. And it's kind of disconcerting because right now I have fuses in that building, and I was going to be doing a total upgrade for safety reasons. And it seems like we've kind of been shut down on this project. If anybody wants to drive by there, you'll see the wires hanging off the side of the building now. It's all up to code. We checked with our or electrical inspector. We met with the electric company before we started the project. And then this other engineer came into the project and said, no, this can't happen. So we were hoping to set it up for electric charging, for cars and some mini splits in the building. And this is only a 3-family building. It's not a big building. So I'm really just kind of concerned if we have enough energy in our grid. And if we're getting stopped with a small project like this, where are we heading with things? I don't understand how we're going to have enough electric power for all of our needs. And that's pretty much it. I just wanted to share that story. Thanks.
Thank you. Dory?
Hi, my name is Dory Brooks. I live at 188 Federal Street in Florence. I'm a licensed architect, business owner in the city, and past president of the American Institute of Architects Massachusetts chapter. I'm still currently on that board. If it's okay, I'm going to read just because I actually took the time to prep, and that way I won't miss anything I said. So I'll try and do it quickly. So first off, I absolutely support the general concept of fossil fuel elimination and decarbonization. I think it's great. I have been strongly supportive of this for a long time. As an architect, I've designed both my own home retrofitted to become all electric, as well as designing multiple multifamily projects in Northampton that are all electric and successful. And my own business is relocating to Northampton and converting a historic property, adding an addition and making it all electric. So I'm firmly behind the idea. However, as I think you're hearing, there's a lot of real reasons why this is not a great idea to go this step far enough. So I want to back up and talk a little bit about the point of this pilot project and where it came from politically, a little different tangent. So the point is to measure the impacts, positive and negative, of deciding to go fossil fuel free in both new construction and renovation in a city. It came about because Brookline wanted to do this and was told by the Attorney General that they could not. And and I'd say climate activists, particularly in wealthy suburbs outside of Boston, wanted the new stretch code to be fossil fuel free, entirely wanted to really push all electrification. The legislature gave the job of writing the code to the DOER. DOER spent years studying it. They came out with both this base stretch code, which is a huge leap forward, as well as the municipal opt-in code, which strongly pushes all electric, but does not eliminate fossil fuel. And they did significant research behind this before they did it. They did that for a reason, because the building science arguments are that you should not push that hard because every building condition is separate and distinct. And renovation to all electric is extremely difficult to do in all circumstances. There are reasons why it's going to become much more costly in one project than it might in another. So they held back on that. But politically, this did not satisfy a very strong constituency in very wealthy communities around Boston who wanted this met. So the legislature gave this pilot for 10 communities only to see what the results would be. So we are not Brookline, we're not Newton, we're not Arlington. The value of the properties in this city are significantly lower. The quality and condition of many of them, they're in desperate need of renovation, both our downtown and many residences. And the challenge is that if we take this and add this burden on top of other burdens that a property owner has in trying to renovate their property, we create the conditions by which they may choose not to renovate at all, or they may leave the city and do exactly the same project just across the street in another community. So right now, I think we all have to see that we value, I'm not reading it all, am I? Right? It's kind of funky. We value economic diversity in our city, and we have a reason to really strive to create that diversity and support small businesses and homeowners of middle-class means as well. And the trigger you have here is if 50% of a home, 50% of the property has to be renovated, it triggers many code obligations, right? So for me as a business owner, I'm amortizing the investment in my business over 30 years. I have great capital. I can do it. I see the value. It's also good for my reputation to be doing it probably, right? So I hope to do it right. But if I'm a church or a small business trying to convert the use of my building to something else, and I haven't renovated in years. I trigger by being a major renovation, which is a part of the IEBC code. It's a level 3 alteration. If I trigger the level 3 alteration, and let's think of our Congregational Church in Florence as an example, I have to now do structural upgrades to my building to achieve that alteration level. I have to put in sprinklers probably. I probably have to bring accessibility up. And now you've asked me also, even though I have a working boiler that I maybe invested in 5-10 years ago, I have to eliminate that and bring it to an all-electric heating and cooling system as well. That burden of cost, I then have to go to the bank and ask for money to pay for. And I may not be able to get that because I may not have a good marketing argument for it, right? Supporting Bombix isn't actually financially likely to lead to that result, right? So a bank may not care what our fossil fuel goals are. And a bank is likely not to contribute to that cost, you know, or loan the money. So then you see and we see this all the time with clients who come in and they have a dream and they want to do something. And then when we tell them what it's going to cost to achieve all these code obligations, they say, I can't do it. I'm just not going to do anything. So right now we want to encourage businesses and homeowners and the downtown to invest in these buildings. And we want to give them the latitude to do it on a time frame that makes sense. And I think we have to keep pushing for all electric systems for the reasons that you already know. But I think we have to be more realistic about their capital access and their flexibility and allow that flexibility to be there for them to do it. And we want to incentivize rather than club them over the head to make it happen. A city has access to low-cost capital. They can bond for it, you know, and we can plan out these public investments over 50 years. So I strongly am in favor of the city moving on their own properties this way. But I think as your elected representatives of all of the city, you have to be considerate of the entire breadth of the city and its economic needs and try and support the city, especially at this time right now. I also want to point out that so my big argument is that while it makes sense that there be a Western Mass community in this pool to get the data, the point is we don't know what the data is going to be. It could be bad. It could say this is not good for your community. And our condition is really different than the wealthy communities that are entering this program, you know, and the value of their properties is different. So fewer of if I take the same building here and put it there, it may not trigger the same consequences it will here. So there's more to understand. And I would just strongly recommend that you take time here to talk to Kevin Ross. I don't know if you probably have, but just find out what they think the consequences are going to be in the permitting process and how many projects this is going to actually trigger, you know, that you're not even aware that will be triggered by this. And imagine what that might be for those property owners and whether that might actually do the opposite of what you think. Because what we see happen sometimes, you know, I'd say, I'm going to read this part because I remember writing something really intelligent here at this point. Okay, as somebody's pointed out, already as we know, 60 to 80% of the grid power is fossil fuel based and carbon based already. So we're not actually, you know, eliminating that, but we know that long term we will, right? But it's going to be a slow transition. Second, residents and business owners and nonprofits have the free will to not do this in this community. So they won't do it just because you say to, they'll choose not to do it at all. And that's actually worse. Or what we find frequently happening now, and this is actually devastating, and we do large school projects, a community will look to do a project where they could do a renovation and then realize that the cost of renovating with all of these trigger points is greater than the cost of demolishing and building new, where you'd have a cleaner, easier to work with envelope, and you can do this without having to retrofit everything. So why bother? So instead, you're just going to tear the building down. And believe me, the fossil fuel and carbon that's constructed in the manufacturing and construction of a new building is far greater than what you were already using if you did that in a renovation situation often. So this is the part we don't know yet, is if we, right now, you've passed the municipal opt-in, which is an extremely stringent code. And it's hard, and we're working really hard to support that. And, you know, Elon and I, you know, we're going to do it. And you've only adopted it a year and a half ago. You don't yet know the consequences of that code. And now you're taking it a step farther already. It just seems a little bit imprudent. And the consequences, it's not just about like, maybe we could have done better and we step back. You could pass this and could actually do worse rather than better from an actual greenhouse gas emission standpoint, because you could actually encourage the demolition of existing buildings. So my biggest argument is given the renovation side of it, you should really take a moment to hesitate on this and really think about it, because I don't think now is the time to do it. I think we should see how this municipal opt-in code goes and help business owners and property owners as much as we can to reinvest and provide incentives. If there's money somewhere behind this that's going to come to the city, that's going to get distributed to property owners to pay this extra cost, great. But I don't see any of that. So let me know if I'm wrong on that. I hope I am. Thanks.
Thank you. Online, we have Aiden Maynard.
Hi, folks. Good evening. Nice to be back in Northampton. My name is Aiden Maynard. I'm a partner with Powerhouse Energy Consulting. We're a six-person HERS rating company based in Northampton, and we do about 600 HERS ratings a year or so, all around Western Mass. And a lot of interesting points made. I want to start kind of high level to talk about the grid. This idea that the grid is currently dirty, and indeed it is. But indeed, our best chance in moving forward is to put pressure on the grid, on the utilities, on regulators to electrify it. And we know the technology is there to do it. We know that heat pump technology is not the heat pumps from 10, 15 years ago. We know how to distribute solar energy. The technologies here, they need pressure. And utilities are publicly regulated, shareholder-owned companies. As we know in our capitalist society, they're not going to do that on their own goodwill. So big picture, as hard as it is, we have to step up in this moment and take initiative and be the leader to electrify our grid. It is not easy. It's not cheap. It's very difficult, in part because of our old building stock. And I hear the things said repeatedly, the most challenging sticking points here are old buildings. Right? The old churches that go to change a use or go to get upgraded and trigger all these other code upgrades that are very expensive. That is the nature of us not prioritizing those upgrades piecemeal, and probably politics, economy, overvaluation of other properties are all probably play into hand there. Like, what triggers that huge investment need? So I'm going to kind of divide my thoughts into two building types, right? There's new construction and existing buildings. So I'll just start by new construction. Electrification is the most cost-effective way to go. It is not only cost-effective, it is essentially required by stretch code. The HERS ratings that we need houses to get that are law and code in the current stretch code require tight envelopes, high-performance houses with low loads to a point that electrification, heat pumps, is the simplest and the most cost-effective way to do that. And that doesn't matter if it's a one-room ADU in a backyard that needs a $4,000 mini split head, or a sprawling, nice architect designed, very expensive house that needs a geothermal system. Cost-effective, best way to go is going to be heat pumps, in part because the Global Warming Solutions Act requires the utilities, the Mass Save programs, to only invest in electrification. So no longer do gas systems get rebates, new construction, old, whatever. What that means is that if you're a builder, your baseline rebate is $7,500 for a code minimum all-electric house in Massachusetts. If you choose the fossil fuel path, you don't get that rebate. So right away, just the state of the world of the rebates, heat pumps are most cost-effective. So that's new construction. Of course, multifamily triggers a whole different level of performance. But that's where we are for new construction. There's really no reason to build with fossil fuel. And frankly, working with a whole bunch of builders that are confused by code, they want to hear the simple path. They want us to tell them that and to show them that this is just the practical way to go. You don't need to talk to 6 different HVAC contractors, 3 of them that are still trying to service oil boilers, and figure out what is the best approach. There's a path to go. Okay, so renovations and additions are the most controversial part of stretch code. And I will make note that the stretch code is currently being edited to become much better, or much more forgiving for existing buildings. It is going, the current edits are going from a 45 HERS all electric to, I believe, 70, 55 existing building up to 70. So the last stretch code update has been a bear for existing buildings, very challenging, triggering mechanical system upgrades that maybe they weren't planning on. And people have come out and the reaction's been heard. So that is being edited. HERS ratings are going to get easier for existing buildings. You have a much bigger leeway. I do think that this legislation has to be thought of carefully for existing buildings. The stretch code has very specific trigger points of what requires major HERS ratings for existing buildings and major renovations and additions. And I think that needs to be articulated or at least referenced specifically to that in the stretch code, that language. You have to remember that when a HERS rating is triggered, it's the whole house. It's not just an addition. So, people saying that, well, you're going to upgrade part of the house, but if there's an existing fossil fuel equipment there, you don't have to address it. That's great, but very likely to get to the HERS rating, you might have to. So those are part of those scopes now in existing bigger buildings. I think I'll leave it there. In general, I am in supportive of this. I don't think it is a huge lift over the stretch code now. You have to remember the stretch code is at HERS 45 or HERS 42 or lower. We are building high performance buildings now. Existing buildings are going up to 70 or lower. So I don't think it's a huge lift. I think it's a great symbol for the market. And I think that we all need to step up and take this leap eventually. And why not do it now? With the room for the great list of exceptions there, I think make room for the very unique situations that come up. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
Hi, David Murphy. I live on North Elm Street in Northampton. One of the things that concerns me the most about this is that we're trying to disengage from fossil fuels. But 75% of the grid electricity comes from fossil fuels anyway. So whether I burn it in my basement or I buy it from the grid, it's still using fossil fuels. And a natural gas power plant is only about 65% efficient. So they're burning gas and there's a great loss there. And then the distribution network has a great loss. It's not the most efficient way to do things, but we're taking for granted that it is. Heat pumps, I'll grant you, are more efficient than fossil fuel heating systems when it's relatively warm out. But below 40 degrees, they lose a lot of efficiency. Below 25 degrees, they lose a lot more. And below 15, they're basically not that great at all. And I might remind you, we only need the heat when it gets cold. So when it gets cold, the systems work not as well as they do when it's warm. Electricity is 3 times more expensive than natural gas per unit of energy. It's a lot less efficient than burning a fossil fuel. Heat pumps are more expensive to install than a high efficiency gas energy system. Again, people have spoken about affordable housing. It's more expensive to put in heat pumps, and it's more expensive once you're in the house to operate them because the electricity is less efficient per energy unit. Affordable housing is just more expensive if you build it that way. And they're more expensive to operate. I think it's premature. I think the gentleman that talked about the fact that, or Dory talked about the fact that the real driver for this was Arlington and Brookline and wealthy communities in Eastern Massachusetts. Let's let them figure this out, shall we? Because we're not a wealthy community. The median price in this community with our last valuation was like $530-something thousand, which means half the community is valued at less than that. And a lot of these people don't have the funds to make changes like this. I mean, if I'm going to decide I want to try to reside my house, change the windows, do my kitchens and bathrooms, and in the process, I tripped CMR 22524, and now I'm a major renovation. I might have to replace my heating system as well with a more expensive heating system. It could wind up being a real burden. Also, the ordinance that I reviewed, I sent to some people for comment. It's very hard to understand because it's all in references. What's a major renovation? It's defined in 225 CMR 24. It's not defined in the ordinance. The average person doesn't know what it is. Specialized energy code codified by the entirety of 225, 22, and 23, including Appendix RC and CC. The hell does that mean? You know, I sent this to people, they don't know what you're talking about. New construction and major renovations shall be constructed in accordance with the low-rise residential code 225 CMR 22 Appendix RC, including the section RC 102, RC 104, zero energy pathway and mixed fuel pathway shall not be permitted in new construction. What the hell does all this stuff mean? You send it to people, they don't know what you're talking about. And I know a lot of the community is going to be very upset to find out when they want to go do something to their house that they can't. You know, as Mr. Moggio said, he went for electricity, he can't get it. If we're going to put more stress on the grid, perhaps we should first get more generation capacity before we put more burden there. And I just put an electric vehicle charger in my house, and they don't want me to use it till after 9 o'clock at night. You know, they don't want me using it during the day. I'm really concerned that we are a little ahead of ourselves here. And we're going to disappoint a lot of people who don't see this coming because they don't understand what you're up to. And the surprise is going to be when they go to pull a building permit. And I see the building inspector here. He's going to have a lot of upset people when he has to explain to them, you really can't do what you wanted to do because you've tripped all these new codes and now the project is more expensive than you could ever afford to do. So I think long and hard about this. I think you're going to blindside the community with this. And I highly recommend you let our wealthy neighbors to the east who really wanted to do this work the kinks out of it before we impose this on people in Northampton. Thank you.
Thank you. Bouncing back to, so I don't see anybody online. Why don't you come forward?
Hi, Denise Lello. I live in Northampton. I have been working with Mothers Out Front and participating in the Building Electrification Accelerator, which is a statewide group of communities trying to meet our carbon reduction goals and our carbon reduction needs. So what I've heard this evening so far is the proposed changes, which are really quite minor from what already exists. I don't see that this is going to be some new draconian measure if it is approved. What I do see is that people are very confused about a number of things, but especially building codes. Building codes are complicated and they upset people when they think that things are clear and simple, and it turns out to be less clear and simple than they expect. So I would like to support and emphasize what Tom Bassett said in his comments, which is I really hope that there will be good public communication about this so that people understand that this is not a major change that is proposed here. And I think I would also just like to say that every time we have to make a technological change and undertake something major, which is electrification of our buildings, it doesn't go smoothly. You know, we didn't see a smooth transition from horse and buggy to internal combustion engines. We never see a smooth transition anytime a new technology is undertaken. So I hope that people will recognize that the need has been recognized, the city has been moving forward, and this is an incremental step. I'm really pleased personally that we got to be part of this pilot, and it is a pilot. and maybe it won't be perfect and will need to be tweaked at some point. But the other 9 communities have been at this for over a year already. And so whatever terrible hiccups there might be, might already be shown. I want to, the last thing I want to do is just compliment the number of exemptions that are provided in the proposed legislation, so that there are opportunities to accommodate people for whom this might be a great burden. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody online wish to speak? Okay. Go ahead.
Adele, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Adele.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Adele. Just one second. After her.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I was involved as an advocate in the initiation of the proposal, the application for the fossil fuel-free pilot. And I'm at this point really glad to see that the proposed ordinance has so many possible exemptions. And they have carefully delineated exceptions in cost and availability of electricity, for example. And I think that DOER, in their wisdom, it was not just geographic diversity that persuaded them to add Northampton to the list. I think it was because of the gas moratorium and the fact that so many new houses are being built with propane. And propane is expensive, and it is a fossil fuel, and it does not help us to reduce our carbon emissions. So I think that was contributed to the decision to admit Northampton as part of this pilot. And I hope that you will, in your great wisdom, decide to go forward with this pilot and perhaps tweak it to address some of the concerns that have been expressed tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adele. All right, now, thank you for your patience.
Hi, Mike George from 94 Crescent Street. It's a good transition because I'm a propane guy. Yeah, I may be late to the party here. I don't know if it sounds like it's still has to be voted on or if it's already been put through. I was a little late to the party. And like I said, I'm a propane guy, so I'm a little biased. Yeah, I disagree with the fossil fuel ban because like we're almost there anyway, just like a lot of people have said with the stretch code for renovations, for new construction. But I feel, and I have a renovation going on LaSalle, 2-family, and my son's helping me with it. And if the way I look at it is if I can meet the stretch code, if I can meet the building code, the existing code, the HERS rating, but I choose to, I want to cook with gas and dry my clothes. I mean, and hot water. I mean, I don't want a heat pump water heater. You know, I don't want to run out after 2 showers. I want to, you know, if I'm going to dry my clothes in half an hour with gas or an hour with electric, I want to cook with gas. I don't want induction. You're going to take all those choices away from her. The gentleman a few minutes ago said, we're not dictating. It is dictating. If I can meet the code with the renovation or a new build, and you're telling me I can't use fossil fuels for those uses, that is dictating. It's straight up. And I think that someone else brought up the fact that, right, if they're not going to do it in Northampton, they'll just go someplace else. And it's pretty close, you know what I mean, to where we are now with the stretch code. So I think, yeah, I just think trying to put the ban in effect is, it's just a little bit too much. I'm not against electrification. I mean, I have an electric truck. I use mini splits. I just think where it's cost effective and practical is when electrification should be used, but when it's not, there's a place for fossil fuels. And then the other thing I was in the, and I wasn't quite sure, the gentleman earlier said 150% of costs. Was it 50% or 150? 50, okay. And there's also the issue of like, so there's renewable, like gaseous and liquid fuels, like renewable natural gas, renewable propane, clean hydrogen. They all use the same infrastructure that fossil fuels use. So if that infrastructure becomes idle, when those fuels become available or become more available, then the infrastructure won't be there for them. I think, yeah, I'm fine, with the city wants to, incentivize or electrify its buildings or electrify its automobiles. I think that's great. And I think we're all on the same page. I think it's good intentions, bad policy is what it is. I just don't, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just making a note. Okay, sorry. Anybody else in the room? Come on forward. Mr. Henzel.
John Hansel, New Way Homes. I've been building houses the last couple of years, 3 years, fossil fuel free. And before that, I'm probably the one that Deb was talking about. A lot of new houses with propane. There's no problem with propane. Propane is clean and everything else. Her belief is different. The fossil fuel free is I've been doing it because certain people in the city persuaded me. And I listened to those people. But I don't want my freedom of choice taken away. I mean, and I look at the people in front of me. I know you have natural gas. I know you do too. It's like all the people making these rules and regulations all have fossil fuel in their house. And if it's such a bad thing, why don't you start by showing me how much you believe in it? Get rid of it. Have you? Yeah. Then I owe you an apology. But how about you? Tight lips. So that's what I'm saying. If you people believe in it that much, lead by example, not by rhetoric. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Jones online.
I had trouble unmuting. I'm sorry for the delay. I just want to speak a little bit about the idea that we're going to have hydrogen available, or that we're going to have natural gas that's made from manure or trees or whatever else. Those are myths. The idea that somehow we're going to get hydrogen out of the pipes that currently are carrying methane for natural gas. It's crazy. Hydrogen is more explosive. It's more expensive. If you make it from fossil fuels, you have much worse carbon emissions than if you're using natural gas. I don't think that we should have any consideration of what might happen if hydrogen was available. It's not going to be available. And so I would just add that point in your consideration. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room? I'll allow it. I'll allow it.
rebuttal on the hydrogen. I never said you'd use the pipes. Sorry, Sue Timberlake again. I never said you'd use the pipes that exist. Hydrogen can get out of anything. You need special containers. So it'd be in a tank kind of situation where you'd take the tank and put it in your car. And then when you need a new tank, you'd go to a gas station and they'd have tanks. But it gets out of pipes. You can't contain it that way. And you don't have to make it from fossil fuels because it exists as H2 naturally in spaces. They're starting to mine it, I think, in Minnesota, where it doesn't exist with other fossil fuels. It's just a clean gas. But probably the way we'll make it is we'll electrolyze water, which you can do with solar and wind, and there is no carbon in that system. So I'm talking future. I'm not talking this year. I'm not talking at the gas station this year. I'm just saying that everybody's really trying to do it. And Toyota already has a hydrogen car in California. It's called the Mirai, and they're building out the infrastructure for it. So it's not right now, but let's make room for it so that when you do this modification, you include the ability to go to hydrogen when it comes available. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think Mark Moggio has his hand up again, so I will, having allowed one repeat.
Hi, just a quickie here. I just want to make sure, I mean, maybe it would be good to, since we ran into a brick wall with the engineers at National Grid, perhaps a conversation should be had with the engineers at National Grid and see what the, what the grid is like, and what the capacity is like, because we don't want to run into the same thing that we did with natural gas. They don't have the capacity more, which probably is a good thing to a lot of people, but you just want to make sure that it's there, and available, and it's going to be available in the future. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. All right, one more pass. Anybody? Oh, come on forward.
Hi, Tina Ingman, Florence. It was really good to hear some of the problems that might happen with the existing construction. I think the new construction part seems like a no-brainer. But the main part is that I want to say is that I hope you can communicate that while the existing grid is not clean, the whole point of electrifying now is that the grid is getting cleaner and cleaner. And that's why we need to not build new houses using fossil fuels, if at all possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina. All right. I'm not seeing any more hands. Oh, Dory, one more time. No, I gave others a second bite, so.
Political argument, just to reinforce this issue about the grid, I'm sure Elon would say the same thing. We find this to be a consistent problem everywhere. You know, all of the projects we're working on that are new construction are all electric now. And yes, the biggest problem we have is the hours and hours spent trying to beg somebody from National Grid to pick up a phone. They're just tapped and they are struggling, whether it's intentional obfuscation or a problem with the capacity, I don't know, but it is a very real challenge for every project to work through the electrical issues of getting service on projects that are years in the making. So I just want to echo that because I think that was a really great idea that prior to the city council voting on this, having some real conversations that can vet whether or not this city's need, given the moratorium and the fact that we really do have so much of our new construction going to all electric, whether we can also bear that challenge. And it is in the downtown, you know, the design for Craft Avenue, still trying to get National Grid to pay attention and help us get a transformer for multifamily housing that the city desperately needs and wants. It's all electric, passive house, blah, blah, blah. It's perfect. But we have no utility service. So that can really cause tremendous delays, and delays are also cost issues for everyone. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
I will say before I see, I don't have my glasses on to put them on. Aiden, I'll call you just 1 second. I have to say, I have not heard about these issues with hookups, and a question I have is, whether or not those are just an issue generally. We've, anything about this, our adoption of it or not, it sounds like this is already a problem, which I hadn't heard of. So I'd be interested in talking with folks about that more. Aiden, and maybe you're speaking to this a little bit.
There we go. Okay, unmuted. The problem of hookups is very real. Worcester has a crazy backlog. It's extremely disruptive and terrible. So it's not just Northampton, but it'd be nice if you could put some pressure on DOER to get some answers, or maybe prioritization because you're part of this program or something, to make the grid better work for you. I just want to speak to the challenge of the renovations and additions. Right, so those projects trigger HERS ratings, and that's the most controversial part of the stretch code. I just want to speak to part of the intent. So we work with builders and homeowners who are shocked about that, particularly in the first year, and come to us, how do I do this? And we do use energy modeling to figure out a path to get there. And very often it means decommissioning an old, inefficient fossil fuel system, right? So we see 1950s boilers that just keep going and going in basements that are leaky, unhealthy, dangerous, inefficient to today's standards. And the renovation, the addition was intended not to touch that equipment. So they were going to put $100,000, $200,000 into a master bedroom suite, right? Maybe the nice bay window, breakfast nook, new bathroom, kitchen, all this stuff, because they have a lot of equity in their houses. And Northampton's a wealthy town. I live in the sticks out here in Williamsburg. Just the property values that we have, part of our housing problem is how much value there is in property. I'm just going to say that, and it's probably a political statement, but there's a lot of money in our property. So when part of the intention of the stretch code is that when people are putting a lot of resources in their house, they have to think about energy and they have to upgrade some of these old systems. So there's these points that trigger, okay, the whole house has to meet this energy performance threshold. Now that's the intent of it. There's bumps, there's challenges. Sometimes it's cost prohibitive. Sometimes people don't want to deal with moist, wet basements because you can't electrify old houses and have comfort if you don't deal with a thermal envelope. That's not really a secret, but often ignored by policy and even some incentive programs, that you have to look at the whole house as a system. As we lower our loads, that's very important. We have to deal with moisture. So it's an issue you're gonna, I imagine, come up with this. So for example, someone has an old oil boiler, many people do, or old gas boiler in their basement. That basement may be the warmest room in their house, right? Old steam pipes, old hot water distribution system, uninsulated masonry. So that heat is just being sucked to the outside, but it's keeping the basement warm and dry. As soon as you cut the cord to that stuff and put in 6 mini split heads upstairs, you have to deal with that moisture. It's not an option. And that adds significant cost to projects. So that's a very real, challenging story of, even the base stretch code faces that. Now we're going from HERS 55 to HERS 70. So there's a lot more room of leaving that fossil fuel equipment because you can have a less efficient home coming up pretty soon. But it's still a major challenge. And there's, again, $10,000 and mass save rebates for electrifying, et cetera. But I just want to say that you're going to face these challenges and you're going to hear these stories. Unfortunately, unless we use building code, we're not going to fix these houses. People are going to keep renovating their bathrooms and their kitchens. And yes, people have the right to do whatever they want because that's what's going to improve the value of their house. And they're not going to move those resources to dealing with uninsulated wall cavities, roof asbestos, et cetera, et cetera. And if we're stewarding our building stock, unfortunately, we're going to have to figure out how to do that. And it would be really nice if some more mass save money went into those kinds of retrofits. If the city and state and the federal government had more programs to make it easier to fix these old buildings. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot there relative to what it costs. So I think what people said earlier, that this is a risk doing this program, we're going to uncover issues. The state's already seeing those issues with the regular stretch code. And yes, you may see some more. And maybe that's a learning opportunity to creating more incentives and opportunities for people to actually repair these old buildings, which is what we need in our town. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, anybody make a last pass in the room? We've heard from almost everybody. Anybody online? All right. So, thank you. That's a lot to chew on. I think what I'd like to do is toss it back to the sponsors, and Director Weil is here, to kind of talk through, some of these issues. We've got a little while longer before I promised a earlier night than the last time many of us were in the chambers. But we have some more time to talk. So I think I'll take it back to you guys. I have some questions and thoughts, but we'll come back to them if things aren't addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I took notes on what folks were saying, and I would love to ask if Director Weil would address some of the concerns that were brought up. Just running through them, the question of emergency and standby generators. I think we currently have those in the exemptions for commercial, but maybe not for residential. So that's something to note to move over to have that be for both. The the question of that the grid is currently only part is not fossil fuel free. I think that many folks spoke to the transition that is happening, and that if you do install a fossil fuel system, you're locking that in as 100% fossil fuel free, rather than the percentage that the grid is now slowly declining. But so what struck me the most, hearing from folks, had to do with the major renovations and the challenges there that make projects not viable, especially leading to tear downs. I'm definitely interested that the HERS ratings are changing with the stretch code. That could because it sounds like a lot of what the problem currently is major renovation and the current codes that we've already adopted. So yeah, and I'd like to look into the detail of what triggers the major renovation. We chose to pull out to have the same definition as is in the state code, but as I understand it, we could write our own definition of what a major renovation is in this context. It's not going to change what it is for the stretch code or the specialized code, but for this particular context, we could make adjustments to that. So that seems like the thing that we really need to take a look at. Director Weil, would you like to speak to these?
Sure. I guess why don't we start with the grid question? Because there's a lot of. I actually thought David Murphy described it well, but in a static way, right? So he was describing how heat pumps are. I don't know if he quite said this, but basically, if you assume that a heat pump is 300% efficient at some outdoor temperature, it then matches the carbon emissions of combusting that same, say, natural gas on site at 98% efficiency in a condensing boiler, or at 60-something% efficiency at a combined cycle natural gas plant, and some grid losses. Even so, if you do the math on it, that's basically your break even, roughly. It turns out, though, that the grid uses more resources, right? So we have some wind, we have some nuclear, we have a fair amount of hydro that gets imported. So the grid is actually a bit cleaner. So you only have to get to about like 260% efficient, so a coefficient of performance of 2.6 to break even with the grid in terms of carbon. And every time I look, that number drops a little bit lower. And obviously, what we want is for heat pumps to be more efficient at lower and lower temperatures. And David Murphy was also correct, right, when he said, well, at some outdoor temperature, your efficiency and your capacity is pretty low. Or, on these heat pumps, still better than combusting fossil fuels mostly, right? But there is some point where, at least with the current grid as it currently stands, there's some temperature point, and depending on the efficiency of your heat pump, it actually would be more efficient to combust the fuel on site. And then the question is, well, how many hours per heating season are you actually doing that? And that's where it turns into a very, very small number of hours. So we all kind of experience cold, right? This past few days has been pretty cold, but it's actually spent a lot of hours hovering right around freezing, which is kind of a nice a sweet spot for heat pumps in terms of efficiency. So, we don't get that crossover just on cost of operation until we get down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Is when we have that switchover point. So, and that's of course changing as the heat pumps get better, as the grid gets cleaner, whether we're talking about carbon or money. So it turns out to be very few hours that you have these design conditions, which makes, so on the one hand, you're designing a single building, and yet the circumstances are constantly changing all around it. So yeah, there are going to be some hours when it would have been better theoretically to be combusting on site at super high efficiency than to be running the heat pump. But over a year, the heat pump is much, much better, both cost-wise, again, if designed properly, and it's and a good envelope, right? So this is where the HERS ratings that get triggered actually play into having these things work. Again, what Aidan was bringing up, we actually have to make the envelopes work when we bring these heat pumps in. But assuming we do those things, from the point of view of the grid and from the point of view of the carbon emissions that we're concerned about from a policy point of view, having a few hours of worse performance relative to the bulk of the hours of much better performance is still a pretty good trade. That said, I think the first comment, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, but has a ground source heat pump and a lot of solar, and needs propane for backup. Okay, thank you. And so so also a great point. Now, I don't know what year that house was built and to what standard. So, if you're worried about freezing pipes, there's a reasonable chance that your envelope is not like, say, a new construction envelope would be today, where you could probably coast for several days on basically the thermal mass of the building because you're so well insulated and so airtight, that you probably wouldn't need backup. But if you have an older building, let's say the HERS ratings change for retrofits or renovations, and you're at HERS 75, I think it was that Aidan said, because he read it recently. He actually texted it to, or sent me the link, and I did read it, but I haven't looked at it just now. But anyway, so the HERS rating goes higher. You might find a point where you actually could have a question of, let's say we move the generator, the exemption for generators, we move that to make sure it's also available in the low-rise residential. Great. But is that going to be do you really want to buy a generator big enough to run your entire heat pump system? Or do you want a small backup propane system that's generating heat instead of electricity? Or maybe you're fancy and you get a cogen. But I think it might be reasonable to think about, and we'd have to get very careful about it, how to design an exemption that says, design your heat pump system to satisfy 80% of your design load. And the rest, the other 20% of the design load can be satisfied with some sort of fossil fuel backup system, because quite frankly, it will not run very often. And you haven't locked in that fossil fuel system as the only source of heat in that building without a major renovation. And because they're working complementarily, it could be smaller. On the other hand, two systems is more expensive than one. So there were a bunch of things raised, but maybe I'll pause there and
Could
yeah.
you speak to the major renovations and some of the concerns raised and how we could craft the exemptions to address some of those?
Yeah, some of them, again, as Aiden was pointing out, um, uh, they are in the current stretch code, and they do, you trigger enough with the value of the projects, that you do end up having to make these changes. To the degree those are stopping projects, let's think about Mark Moggio's example where he wasn't able to get power. So we actually did put an exemption into the ordinance as we wrote it now, which basically says, yeah, if you get a letter from your utility that says we can't provide you sufficient power, that's an exemption. So in that case, it's not viable. You want the project to go forward. The utility said we don't have a feeder with sufficient capacity in that location. You can't do it. Then you go to a different plan because it's exempted. One interesting thing. So this problem of transformers, a grid capacity. So two things that people brought up. One was we just don't have enough power on the grid, and the other one is we don't have enough grid capacity at certain locations. The first statement is just not accurate. That we actually have we have plenty of power on the grid because we build it for the worst possible moment when everybody's using electricity. So we've got plenty of it, but there are locations where we can't actually get enough to past a transformer, past a feeder. And that is a very, very well-known big problem on the grid everywhere. There is a change that is possibly coming in at DPU, which is a change. So the problem has been, let's say I want a big electric load and I'm on this side of a transformer, and everybody else on my street has already installed photovoltaics and electric cars and whatnot, and there's actually no space for me. If I want to add either of those two things or whatever, I actually have to pay for the new transformer all by myself. And I'm going to look at that and say, I'm never doing that. The new way is to basically socialize those costs across all PV installations across the state or across the utility territory. And that way it's a small adder on new PV installations that allows the utility to just upgrade the transformer and increase capacity in locations where it's capacity constrained. So that's not here yet, but that is apparently what's coming. So that's some good news. But we've also written in that exemption to just say, no, if you get the letter, you can't do it. Other issues with renovations, I mean, some of that really is the stretch code, and the fossil fuel free doesn't really contribute too much. I could see it, I would raise for a discussion. So Mr. George talked about, well, I just want to cook with gas and I should have a right to cook with gas. And the counter argument is that combustion of gas, whether it's natural gas or propane inside the house, is actually pretty unhealthy. And it's turned out to be kind of a lot worse for indoor air quality than people really realized. And so a good policy goal would be to not have combustion of gas inside enclosed environments. On the other hand, we could decide that we value freedom of choice and we don't want to lock a building in to that one person's freedom of choice because average tenure is like 5 years, right? So the next person comes in and now they have to cook with gas, even if they would like to cook with electricity. Well, current stretch code requires you to wire so you have the capacity, the electrical capacity to switch over to electricity. So I could see writing some sort of exemption that basically relies on that that part of current stretch code to allow people to have choice, but to not lock anyone into a particular appliance. Sure, I didn't cover everything.
Yeah, I mean, was it the cooking systems that was really the stumbling block, though? I would imagine it would be the largest loads, which are the heat, which is the heating system. And we could have further discussion with Dory or others to get the details of that. But did you have a sense of? I mean, maybe we need to have further discussion to get, where is the exact problem and what kind of exemptions could we add?
Was that directed to me or?
If you feel if you have enough information to answer it, but otherwise, I think we need to get more information.
Agreed.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all this. I certainly came into tonight with some questions, but now I have more. Not all of which I think can be answered tonight necessarily. I wonder if one thing we might talk about is if there can be an exemption that allows for a needed change of use. So if a change of use, so for instance, you had mentioned, for instance, daycare. If the change in use would go to a, if we could specify any uses that are needed in the community, so daycare seems appropriate. I don't know. I'd have to brainstorm a little bit about it, but I'm not, super, I'm not super motivated by a change in use that is sort of, I don't know, purely profit driven or just another, business, or, I mean, I love the bars, and all that sort of stuff, but I wouldn't want to hold up, a development or, something that would bring something like Bombyx into the community, or where there's a real need that the change in use is fulfilling. So I would wonder about that. We talked a little bit certainly about standby power, and I think you mentioned this. I can't remember which of the resolutions or discussions we had about this before, but emergency replacement, I have a real concern. And I think this is covered by your exemptions, but I would need to look at it and think about it more. But I have especially in this age of extreme weather events, having somebody, have an extreme weather event that meant that they had to do a massive, what amounted to, reconstruction of their home, tree falls through, and the total value, puts it up. And then on top of that, if we were to add, having to revamp an entire HVAC system and go that way, I think there needs to be an exemption for weather, extreme weather, fire, things like that where people were not planning and might not get from the insurance company what's necessary to make the whole leap. We're gonna see. There's a timeline on this. Can you remind me of what that is?
Yeah, so the state requires it to be approved by the 27th of January. So
Or what happens?
we're not part of the program.
Is there somebody in line behind us if we don't?
I don't know the details of that.
Somerville.
Sorry, say again?
Somerville.
Somerville, okay. And I guess the other thing is there any things to think about? Are there any safety valves that we could put into this so that if there are sort of unanticipated consequences, we have the freedom to dial it back and dial it back quickly? Or something,
Sorry, I just got a note from Rachel that somehow the raise hand feature is not working for her. So just want to make sure we go to her when it's time.
Oh, okay. Somebody does have a reason. So I will come back to that in just a minute. And I've got you up on my screen now, Rachel, so holler if you need us. Okay, so, yeah, these are a lot of questions. I will, one thing that and I don't know if anybody here, I'll come back to you. You're behind a couple, and I don't know if anybody here or Ben can answer this. It doesn't sound to me that like the Dewey Court project, like it's not the difference of the stretch code. It's a National Grid thing, right? And this lack of, and Ben, I don't know if you can answer this question. Like, I just wondering if they're having this hookup problem and it's not because the stretch code, the existing stretch code is putting more of a demand on it. As it's.
I mean, on the one hand, I can't answer specifically about Dewey Court, because this is the first I've heard of it, but in general, right, there are a lot more electric demands, not more electric demand. I mean, there's some of that too, but not as much in our region as other places where there are more data centers. But so a lot of more diversity of loads that are being added, and the utilities have not caught up. I mean, that's just true. And it's a good reason to have an exemption that says if the utility can't help you, then you shouldn't have to comply anyway. But yes, it is all over, really all over the country.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to understand if it's the sort of like the straw that's breaking the camel's back per se, or if it's it seems
No,
like one
electrification.
factor of many things that are driving electric consumption.
No, electrification right now, just of heating, if we're talking about basically conversion, is really what we're talking about, conversion of fuel heating to electrification of heating, is not significant enough. And the load shape is different, right? So we still are a summer peaking load. So we have a peak load on the grid in the summer based on cooling. And therefore, right now, heating is not larger than cooling. The electric demand for heating is not larger than cooling. So the electric capacity required by all these houses that need cooling is already creating enough capacity, or is requiring enough capacity to enable heating.
And we're adding more cooling demands.
And we're adding more cooling demands. And to some degree, the addition of electric vehicles is starting to show up in some places. But a lot of it actually is photovoltaics that are sending electricity the other way, but still need to go through the same infrastructure.
I think so. Okay. All right. So we're at 20 till. So this is what I'd like to do. I was going to go to, well, just let me say, so I'm going to go to Garrick, and then Laura Baker is online, and Mr. George.
And then Rachel.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Rachel. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go to, actually, I'm going to go to Rachel first.
Mine's quick and has to kind of do with.
Okay.
Sorry, Rachel. I know you've got some stuff to say, but I was just looking at the reporting requirements for this this program. And one thing it says is that we will be required to report to the appropriate electric and gas distribution companies and vice versa. They're going to have some requirements. So I'm wondering, have we been in contact or with those companies? Because a lot of the question is about the capacity for the grid and whatnot. So have we reached out to representatives from these companies?
So I would turn that to Director Weil.
Yes.
If you could keep it brief, because we're reaching.
Yeah, we did. They're supportive. National Grid is working with us on the application.
Okay, and so Rachel, and then I'll do Laura Baker and Mr. George.
Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to make sure when we're talking about exemptions and altering our exemptions, that we're not making them to problems that we've been talking about with the stretch code, because what I'm hearing is a lot. I hear some frustrating present situations like with National Grid, and I was hearing some fears, but the reality is we have the stretch code and we could debate that separately if we wanted to, but I don't want this ordinance to try to kind of address what's going on in the stretch code. So we really have to be quite, clear about that. And one thing that I took away from the comments was that, yeah, we have to make a guide sheet or because clearly when people were looking at this, they weren't picking up on the fact that the exemptions cover a lot of this already. So that is a good point to see. We did, there's a template that, there's certain things we had to cover for the state. It's not quite how I would have written an ordinance on my own. So I really hear that about the, perhaps making a more user-friendly doc. But before we, let's just be mindful if we start editing or adding exemptions that it's actually to this ordinance and not addressing the stretch code. Yeah, that's it for now. Thank you.
And just to respond to that, I do actually agree that there is, you reach a level of sort of do or do not. If you let the exemptions just swallow the whole, then why do it, right? It may mean we're not there yet, but I want to make sure that so I agree with you, Rachel, that if we're writing in too many exemptions, then that's sort of sending a message about where we're at with this. I do want to speak also to the sort of the complaints about the ordinance language and the references to the regs and all that. The building codes, by definition, are a tool of the people who use them, and the people who use them are architects and designers and builders and those kinds of things. So I can appreciate that you can't send an ordinance like this or a building code like this or zoning or whatever to your average constituent and expect them to make sense of it all. That's quite frankly not who the ordinance is written for. So it's why it's really important that folks are here tonight who are in the industry and build. And if they're saying to me, if you're saying to us, we can't understand it, we can't make sense of it, that I certainly take to heart. I'm not particularly persuaded by complaints that it's not just sort of readable and legible and that kind of thing. So I appreciate what state has made us do, and I also and it has to go into this, and I thank the sponsors for that work. Very quickly, just so because I can get back to the other people.
Come up to the mic.
Licensed architect. Just want to say that the ordinance is citing the definition of major renovation, which is code driven. So I don't believe you could change that because you're citing, it's saying, by virtue of this, you're embroking that. You can't go change it because that's actually written in the International Existing Building Code, Massachusetts amendments. So that's promulgated by BBRS. I don't think you have the capacity to change that because you were talking about, well, maybe we could make some alterations there. That's different than your exemptions. It's the definition. Those definitions are coming out of existing codes already. And those you don't have the power to change, I doubt. And that's one of the challenges here is where that code comes from. And I could explain that definition if you need, because I brought it along to go through it because it is what we're talking about is the biggest area of concern for us as architects is the renovation situations that are triggered that we can't not trigger currently. Right. We're working to help that out. But yeah.
I would say I think we can leave it for now. I know I've heard that definition in other discussions of this kind of, and I leave it to the sponsors to because I think you probably know the definition that Dory's speaking of. Okay, yes. So.
But if I could say, we were told that we can define fossil fuel free differently. We are allowed to change that. I'm unclear if we're allowed to define some of those others.
Okay.
But can we write something into the exemptions that references elements and say elements of the major renovation definition, and then say this part of the major renovation definition applies, this part there's an exemption for.
I'm going to go to Laura Baker online.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I just wanted to mention, I work at the Valley Community Development Corporation. We're on Pleasant Street in Northampton. And my job as a project manager is to develop multifamily, affordable housing. We, in the age of all electric buildings, we feel very vulnerable about backup systems. And so for us, it's extremely important to have flexibility to use a fossil fuel driven backup system. Not only for heating and cooling, but we have folks who have health vulnerabilities, need oxygen. We have people who absolutely rely on elevators and things that are powered with electricity. And it honestly is my biggest worry as we move. We have one already built building that's all electric. We have 2 under construction now in Northampton. It is one of my biggest worries about the whole thing is what happens when the grid goes down. And we've looked into battery backup to try to protect our tenants and protect our buildings. And the technology just doesn't seem to be there yet. And so that kind of loops us back around to using fossil fuels in those situations. I think that's all I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
And if I could just
sure, go
speak to that briefly. For multifamily, so it's only low rise residential that we did not have previously the exemption for emergency and standby systems. So I think most of the multifamily buildings that would have already applied, but it will certainly look at adding that to the low rise as well.
Thank you. Mr. George, you still?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I would just ask the council to just think about all the sort of unintended consequences. And if the benefits outweigh those. And then the other thing I was thinking was I didn't really think about commercial buildings. I'm assuming it applies to commercial buildings also. So if, like, I can't imagine if you were putting up like a repair garage or a warehouse or a sports, like some wide open big space, how you would do that with heat pumps. They would look at you like you got 3 heads and then they would say, I'll go build it somewhere else. Like, I don't see how you could do it. I don't know. Kevin, you?
All right. Thank you.
I would just say that that's where we want to write in the exemptions, and we do have a number of them for those type of situations.
Okay.
Mary Ann.
Rachel, do you have something?
I was just gonna say Mary Ann.
For a while.
Oh, I didn't see.
It blends into her house.
It does. All right, Mary Ann. Councilor Labarge.
Thank you. Anyways, I do have questions, and just hearing from what I'm hearing as a counselor from people that I've talked to. I have talked with the owner's son at the Bird store. He brought it to my attention. They were building the apartments across the street from the Bird store. Very, very upset. They apparently wanted to put in the heat that they wanted to do, just like they did with their other building that they built near it. And they were outright told, no, you cannot do that. They said the cost was extremely expensive. I know a lot of contractors, and they told me the cost is very expensive. But that's added on to the people that are buying a house. I'm talking about a brand new one being built and so forth. I have to be honest with you also. I agree. Electric. My house was all electric when we built it from scratch many years ago. We paid $1,000 a month just on electric for this home. We've had now a bison put in almost like 16 years ago. I can't tell you. Oil, I mean, it was one of the best that you could have. And it cost us $17,000. I wish we had known that earlier when we were building our house. It would have been much cheaper. But our cost, just with oil, the drop of it is significant versus the electricity, $1,000 a month. And right now, with the cost of everything going up, it would be higher than that. I have people, and I agree with the former counselor, David Murphy. Many, many people are telling me they're so confused with this. And I really think that every time we bring something there's a time limit, To me, this is really, really critical here for people to understand what this is actually all about. That's it for me. Like I said, I've talked with many people, contractors right down the line, and told me the cost, they give it because they have to give it, and the people have to pay for it. So anyways, I want to thank our former counselor, David Murphy, for coming forth tonight, because I'm hearing the same problem that he is going through. So, and I want to thank the sponsors. This is not an easy one, and it's not. You've been working on it for a long time. But I think total communication with the public is extremely important. And you know, I believe in communication. And when people are telling me, what the heck is going on here? You know, and you try to explain to them, and they said, I never heard of such a thing. And they said, well, nobody's going to tell me what I'm going to do with my property. Nobody's going to tell me. And that's another thing people are saying. You're into residential. You want to add on another small room. So you got to go electric for that room. That does not make sense for me when they have another process of heating their homes. So I'm a little confused with that. But anyways, I want to thank you, sponsors, because this is not an easy one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne. Okay. So here's where I'm at. It sounds like you guys are tinkering with this a good deal more. I'm having trouble. I think I'd have trouble with a positive recommendation tonight, which is not to say, I mean, I've always been supportive of the overall effort. I mean, and have, been ahead of this. I'm left tonight with a lot of questions, and it also sounds like you took a lot of notes. I would be more prepared to vote for a neutral recommendation at this point, primarily because I feel like the information from tonight's going to be taken in by you guys, and that what we might be seeing in the end is different. So that's where I'm at. Remain, steadfast in my support of this forward movement, but I have some concerns. I wish I knew if we could write this in a way so that we could be a part of this project, but with a great deal of flexibility going forward to adjust what needs. I mean, because to be, to me needs to be dealt with. Because I mean, I will say, to your point about unintended consequences, we are living in a world of unintended consequences from carbon emissions and from all of this, which is not to diminish your point. We always need to be considering about that, but so that's kind of where I'm at. I think I want to see what you guys take from tonight, and bring back. But
So, yeah, I can speak to that. And I appreciate hearing what Rachel has to say too. I feel like I identified 3 areas where we need to tailor the exemptions. So the emergency and standby generators for all, the emergency replacement after disaster that you brought up, making sure that that's clear, that that's not going to trigger the replacement requirements or the upgrade. If this won't be triggered if you're just rebuilding an existing house or that was damaged. And the question of major renovations, in general, what should the exemptions be for those situations where it's making projects not viable? And then the change of use. Should there be exemptions for certain changes of use or just exempt change of use in general? But again, it's not going to deal with the stretch code issues, which, we heard Councilor Labarge speak to, current projects that she's hearing, and that's not this, because this is not an effect. And the question is, how much will this change that in the future? And we need to learn about what those individual projects and how this might affect them. So those are the three things. I think we're not going to look at new construction. Then in general, new construction is accepted with the exemptions we already listed, which are considerable. So if you were to do a neutral recommendation with addressing those issues, I would do a positive recommendation with addressing those issues, but I would also support a neutral.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think you did a great job identifying the few areas that actually are about this ordinance and not about the stretch code. We have very generous exemptions happening here, very thoughtful ones. I'm not really comfortable with a neutral recommendation. I'm comfortable with a positive recommendation, with the understanding or contingent on us addressing the identified issues. I'm kind of afraid this neutral recommendation is coming from an overwhelm around the stretch code and not really about what's in front of us. I understand that there needs to be, we need to address the issues, the three issues you identified. So I would advocate for a positive recommendation with a contingent on us addressing those three areas, just like we often do with legislation.
All right, and then there's me. I, much like Councilor Elkins, was leaning towards a neutral recommendation, but if we move forward, a positive recommendation doesn't mean I have to, vote for it that way in the city council. But I believe in what we're doing. I believe being future thoughtful is very important. Some of my questions, and then I've heard a lot of what people have had to say. There's a lot of information to take in, but I am curious about what this program sets us up for. Is there a future plan for, does this open us up to different opportunities that we wouldn't have in the future? I'm just, I know we're talking about this ordinance, but this ordinance is in conjunction with an actual program. And so I have questions about what are the benefits to our community about being in this program, whether it's just that to say that we're part of it, or do we have a goal, or is there incentives for communities to be a part of it, or do we have access to kickbacks or things like that? So, if you guys can,
Not kickbacks. We don't do
kickbacks. Yeah, I know, but so that's where I am. Is I'm trying to put this ordinance in the bigger puzzle of where we're going as a city and how that works with this program. So I have questions.
Rachel?
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And that's something we could possibly address at the council meeting to go over those if you'd like. What the entire program means to us. But I would like to make a motion to positively recommend this ordinance with the contingent on us addressing the identified amendments that we've discussed here.
Second.
All right. So we have a motion made by Councilor Maori, a second by Councilor Jarrett for positive recommendations, sort of contingent or subject to addressing
That's a better word. Subject to. I like it. Thank you. Takes a lawyer sometimes.
Yeah, I know. For better, for worse. Yeah, subject to dealing with those or addressing those. Any discussion on the motion? So I would just add, I am going to vote in favor of this positive recommendation. Which is truly not to diminish, these questions that I've raised. I want to see the sort of the contours of what you guys come up with. And I'd be interested, I don't know, if there are any sort of safeguards in the program for the, which maybe there's not. There's a certain level of some fancy towns in Eastern Massachusetts came up with an idea that I support and certainly am behind. But also, is there, do we bear the cost of unintended consequences alone? Or, you know, I don't know. I am interested to know, because we are ahead of the curve. And I think we need to be there. I'm very much in favor of that, as I have always consistently been. But I do have more questions. So I'll vote for a positive recommendation tonight. But I'm continuing to think about this, not in the big picture, but in the details of what we do. Because that is, as we've all heard, where the devil resides. So, any other comments from any of the committee? Okay, if we can have a roll call, please.
Counselor Perry.
Yes.
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 And Counselor Elkins.
Yes. Well, that was a really great discussion. And really, all of you who are here, who, you know, express some reservations, keep talking to us. You know, certainly keep talking to the sponsors. We've been through rounds of these. You know, I certainly, I know folks struggle with the distinction between the stretch code that's already in place and what we're talking about, the difference here. You know, I certainly know where we're coming from with that, and what we're doing, and the sort of the difference in the sort of incremental changes of that, what's already in place versus what we're contemplating. But I do, you know, I am concerned about I think maybe after, if you want to address this privately, that we, you know, we keep talking, also keep pushing the ball forward, but also, you know, it does matter. It does matter how these things get built, and that they do get built. And so it is a balancing, but all that being said, we are at 8:04, and I promised to
adjourn.
to be done. I have a motion. And I think Rachel seconded.
Second, sorry.
All right. So there's no discussion on adjournment, but we do have to have a roll call.
Yes.
Counselor Maori.
Yes.
Counselor Elkins.
Yes.
And Counselor Perry.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I can't believe you basically hit your goal, so that's good.
I tried.
You did.
All right.
Good-
I'm really
good night.
hungry. Good night.